internet. In 1992, when Ross Perot had people signing people up, well, what do they do? Put it into a file folder? You know, okay. 1994, we get the Republicans in there and they become the problem. We didn't have the internet back then. Now we are engaged. And we finally realized what Rush Limbaugh, he wasn't lying to us. The first line of defense and offense for the organized left has been the mainstream media and Hollywood. Yeah. And so we've declared war on them first and foremost because, well, did you see what happened over the last 3 weeks? David Weston is gone, Jeff Zucker is gone, and Jonathan Klein is gone. That is not because the chyrons underneath were in the wrong font. That is not because the color of the hair of the host was off. It wasn't because of ageism. It was because they're liars. And the people that they chose to lie about were the American people, where they falsely framed us as the enemy. So we waited 20 years. We gave you 20 years of warning, starting with Rush Limbaugh, and you didn't listen. And you tried to call him out as the worst thing in the world. And then you went after Matt Drudge and all the people that said, you know what, I'm going to figure out how to do HTML. Well, now my toe could start a website drunk. Okay? We all have the ability now to take these people on. And so when I went to my first Tea Party rally, and as you can tell, I don't have prepared speeches. I kind of wing it. But there's always new information in my head because the week in baseball, the week in inside media baseball is so filled with villainy and treachery that I just go out there and I say, you know what? They're the enemy. And here's why they're the enemy. The first week that I went to defend this group of people who just wanted to espouse their love of country, love of fiscal responsibility and the Constitution, the unfortunately named anchor by the name of Contessa Brewer at MSNBC had an entire segment in which she showed, does everybody know this story yet? You don't know this story. It's so good because this shows how evil they are. Ooh, I'm not allowed to call them evil. I'm not allowed to call them socialists. Yes, I am, because evil people do this. They had a discussion about the Tea Party and people that were protesting the president. And they showed a guy in Arizona who was flaunting that he was armed at this rally. But what was so strange about this photo is that somehow they used an X-Acto knife to cut his head off in order to have a discussion whether or not these protests, with all the violence that is symbolic in a man carrying his weapon, the Second Amendment, are these protests racist? And the unfortunately named Contessa Brewer continues on. I'm like, something's wrong here. Why do you have a picture of all the pictures to show? Why do you have this gentleman's head cut off? It doesn't make sense. You have to go out of your way to go get Photoshop or use an X-Acto knife and then scan the photo. It doesn't make sense unless the person that was holding the gun was black. That doesn't go with the narrative. So as they call you racist, they cut off a black man's hat and say that he's racist and somehow that he's white. Then they start saying, we get a message from the White House when you guys start asking questions of your elected representatives. And they didn't like that much because they thought that the mainstream media and the will of that gentleman's charisma, that they were going to socialize 1/7 of our economy. And our patriotic elder statespeople said, nah, it's not going to work out. I understand that you're going to have to cut Medicare. You're going to have to do this and that. We have some questions for you. And because they asked a few basic questions, Barack Obama brought in Andy Stern from the SEIU. Barack Obama brought in Richard Trumka from the AFL-CIO. And they said, what are we going to do? And so the AFL-CIO issued in August, I believe it was about August 5th of 2009, a letter to the rank and file of the AFL-CIO. Get in their faces. What do you mean, my aunt and uncle? My grandmother? My grandfather, who are asking these people to simply read the bill? And John Conyers says, I'm not going to read 1,000 pages. But that's what organized labor, which got this president elected, and they're the presidents of the United States right now. And I got to be honest with you, I don't like these people very much. And then you got the SCIU. And there were 2 town hall meetings that day. And Jim Messina, who's the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, he said on that day that the AFL-CIO said, get in their faces. Jim Messina said, if they punch, you punch back twice as hard. And do you know what happened that night at those town halls? One in Tampa and one up in Missouri in Russ Carnahan's district. Organizing for America and the SCIU came down there, made sure that none of you got to ask the questions. People in purple shirts bumped their way in, took their seats, did not allow you to ask questions. And as they started to walk out, at the very end of it, the people who wanted to be there to ask the questions were standing out in a silent protest. The SCIU, 2 thugs walked up to a black vendor by the name of Kenneth Gladney, who was holding a Gadsden flag to sell. And they said, what are you doing here? N-word. And they beat the crap out of him. And I went out there and I made it the biggest story on my site, and the mainstream media ignored it because it went against the narrative. Katie Couric ignored it. I said, you know what? This trend is starting to add up here. They are doing to us what they're accusing us of doing. They attack us. They beat us up. They bit off a person's finger in Thousand Oaks, California. The mainstream media played it down. They beat up Kenneth Gladney and they played it down. They hired the top Democratic lawyers in St. Louis to protect these SCIU thugs who beat him up and called him the N-word, while they continue to call you these names. And so as you watch this juggernaut, a growing juggernaut of the American people saying, you know what? We're not the America that we were the last 20 years. We're a new America. We wasted the last 20 years buying crap. And we're gonna be the America that's gonna save this country, and we're gonna take on the bullies out there, whether it be the SCIU, the AFL-CIO, Acorn, the president, our corrupt congressmen, and anyone in the Republican Party that doesn't get it. This has been an awakening for us as a country. And I think that the critical point when I realized this thing is heading well beyond what I think even us in the room, well, it's not a room. Okay, God, it's a room, okay. Thank you. In my mind, I realized that the day that they passed that health care bill, they knew that they were stepping into the abyss. That they knew that the American people said, we've given you fair warning. We've given you fair warning. And they didn't take our advice. And so Nancy Pelosi did something that in my mind, I knew that they were going to do something. The day before they voted, do you remember when there was 40,000 people in front of the Capitol? And you started hearing words that the Congressional Black Caucus was called the N-word 15 times by 15 people, and that the Congressional Black Caucus, Congressmen Carson, Lewis, and Cleaver were spit on, and Barney Frank said that he was called a homophobic aspersion. And then later in the day, if this was such a violent Janet Napolitano condemned area of American citizens, why did she walk through there with that big shit-eating grin with that gavel? Because she knew that she needed to get a YouTube moment in which one person or two people overreacted so that they could hang you with that misbehavior. And when they didn't get it, they made it up. And the mainstream media continues to this day to lie about the American people. At a certain point, enough is enough. At a certain point, we don't say they're misguided. At a certain point, you don't say they're biased. At a certain point, they've declared that they're the enemy of the American people. It's not why I'm not invited on TV that much. How do I know this? They're my neighbors. I live in LA. I go to cocktail parties. And they go, I think that the people in flyover country are dumb. I go, did you just say that? You work at ABC News. They don't like you. And that pisses me off. Because without you, there would be no America. Without you, there would be no Porsche Targas, and Whole Foods and their Pilates sessions with private trainers. Without you, that wouldn't exist. They don't get it. And for 40 years, we allowed for them to take over our culture. And I want to tell you this thing before I leave, because this is why I believe this is a very, 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 very real movement that is going to transcend the election. It started before the first Tea Party. The people that motivate me the most are a growing group of patriots out in Hollywood who 40 years ago allowed for the hope and change to come into Hollywood. At the tail end of the Jimmy Stewart era and the John Wayne era, the radical leftists came into Hollywood with hope and change. And that hope and change was distilled down into the basics: nihilism, sex, sarcasm, snarkiness, and it extracted the American experience, the hard work. That what the patriots that created Hollywood made America a beacon of hope for people around the world. And those self-hating cultural Marxists came into Hollywood and they undermined our culture. And we didn't fight back. We didn't fight back. But there is a growing group of people out there in Hollywood who are you. They're famous. They're actors, they're writers, they're directors, they're musicians, they're punk rockers, they're black, white, purple, gay. They want to save this country too. And that happened before the Tea Party happened, because like dogs before an earthquake or whatever the proper dog natural disaster. Is it dogs and earthquakes? I don't know. Rats and tsunamis? I don't know. Okay. They understood. Hope and change does not come from people on the left. A boot in the neck is what comes to these people, because these people can't make the movies that say that this is a good country, that tells people that we stand for what is good. These people are nihilists. These people hate you. And there's only one thing we can do, and that is, after 40 years, reluctantly, but with great enthusiasm, engage in the war that they started against us. That is what is at stake here. And I cannot begin to tell you how much I appreciate that you come out for this country like this. I am one of you. I do not have a fancy, everybody says, oh, you're a media mogul. If I'm a media mogul, why do I have 2 car payments and a mortgage I can't afford? It's because I live in LA. That was the answer. I know. People go, hey, somebody said to me, I have a 40,000 square foot house. Oh my God. I got to move to Houston. Thank you very much for having me. One word of encouragement. I have 9 employees. How does one take on the U.S. government? How does one take on the culture with only 9 employees when the other companies that I'm fighting against have large buildings with hundreds of people? It's a simple business model that's working brilliantly. I have you. You are my reporters, you are my eyes, you are my video camcorders. You are the ones that capture the beatings that the SEIU deliver. You are the ones that film when I walk into a crowd.